Alan Dershowitz is a professor emeritus of Harvard Law School joining us now. Professor, good to see you as always. Big day today. The opinions have been extended, not typical fashion for the Supreme Court. We're waiting for this, again, the presidential immunity opinion. Expectations from you, sir?
I think neither side will have total victories. And the real question is, will there be enough allegations in the indictment that don't get immunity to justify Smith going forward with the case? I think there probably will be, and he'll have to make a hard decision at that point, whether to narrow the indictment and try to go after him on just allegations in the indictment that aren't covered by immunity, or whether he tries to go back to the district court and ask them to expand the number of aspects of the case that they can go after him on. The big point is that timing, whether or not there's enough time to do all of this before the election. And we'll know in less than an hour.
Yeah. Speaking of timing, let's go back in time a few months to those arguments in April. We pulled some of those sound bites. So this is Justice Neil Gorsuch, where he said, the question becomes, as we've been exploring here today, a little bit about how to segregate private from official conduct that may or may not enjoy some immunity. And then we heard from Ketanji Brown Jackson, more liberal justice. I'm trying to understand what the disincentive is from turning the Oval Office into, the seat of criminal activity in this country. Professor, does that sort of give you a preview of how some of these justices might be leaning?
Yeah, it does. And Justice Barrett also said some things that were very interesting. She basically said to the Jack Smith lawyers, well, why don't you just change the indictment and indict him for things that are not within the scope of presidential acts? And Smith's lawyer said, no, we want the whole hog. We want to go after him for everything. So I think we're going to see a split decision. Whether it goes exactly along liberal-conservative 6-3 lines, I suspect so. But I also think there'll be some concurring opinions. I wouldn't be surprised if we had 4 or 5 different opinions. I predicted this result in my book, Get Trump, even before the oral argument. I think both sides were asking for too much. Trump was asking for too much immunity, and Jack Smith was asking for too little immunity. And I think the Supreme Court will say, you get some immunity for core activities within the presidency. For example, the president ordered the killing of Soleimani, the terrorist from Iran. Surely he has immunity for that. On the other hand, does he have immunity for making a speech in which he says patriotically and peacefully go down and demonstrate? That will be a harder question. Does he have immunity for some of the things he's charged with in Fulton County, Georgia, or what he's charged with in Florida? Those are issues that are in the details. And I think the Supreme Court won't necessarily decide those issues retail. They'll probably make a wholesale decision and then send it back to the trial court to make the retail decision as to exactly how it applies to counts in the indictment.
Long shot here, perhaps it's not, but if it gets sent back down to the D.C. Court of Appeals or the lower courts again, is there a possibility it then gets shot back to the Supreme Court even after that?
It's possible, but usually the Supreme Court doesn't like to take a case the second time. It tries to give instructions that are clear, but it's possible that it can come back to the Supreme Court. The big issue is timing. Is there enough time to bring this case to trial? Because the goal of Jack Smith, he said it basically, is to get a conviction, let the voters use that conviction as part of their calculation as to who they vote for. And if the case then gets reversed, well, it'll be after the election, so it will have no impact. So it is election interference, and the Supreme Court may see through that, at least some of the justices, and try to not make it easy for Smith to manipulate the legal system for partisan purposes.
We saw what a jury trial looked like in the New York case. What might a D.C. trial look like? Before we even get that, of course, we've got to wait for the ruling to come down. So, Professor, if you don't mind staying with us, at least once we get that ruling, we'll check back in with you. That's Alan Dershowitz joining us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.